The most experienced diver in the group was the first to panic. Robert Smith had logged over 500 dives in open water, could navigate treacherous currents with his eyes closed, and had never needed rescue in 15 years of diving. So when he bolted for the surface at 1:47 p.m. on May 28, 1973, the 7 divers he left behind figured he'd lost his nerve. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to them. Not on what should have been a routine exploration dive. Mount Gambier, South Australia, sits on a foundation of limestone honeycombed with caves and sinkholes that have drawn explorers for generations. The region's geology tells a story written in water and time. Ancient seas that deposited layers of marine sediment, millennia of groundwater that carved elaborate passages, and volcanic activity that created the distinctive crater lakes the area is famous for. Among these geological formations, one particular opening had earned a reputation that bordered on mythical among local divers. They called it the Shaft. Picture a narrow gap in the earth, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, dropping straight down into blackness. The limestone walls, carved by countless years of water flow, gleamed white in torchlight before vanishing into the void below. At 150 feet down, the established shot line ended, a rope that previous explorers had anchored to guide future descents. Beyond that depth lay unmapped territory, a three-dimensional maze of passages and chambers that no human had fully explored. But 150 feet wasn't the bottom. Stories circulated in the diving community about what lay deeper. Vast chambers that could swallow a cathedral, a mysterious rock pile at 40 meters depth that served as a landmark for the brave few who had ventured that far, passages that twisted through the earth like arteries through a body. These weren't just rumors. They were irresistible calls to adventure for anyone with the skill and courage to answer. The diving community in South Australia during the early 1970s was tight-knit, bound together by a shared passion for exploring the underwater world. Equipment was basic by today's standards. Single-hose regulators, minimal buoyancy control, and dive computers that existed only in science fiction. Training focused primarily on open water techniques, with little distinction made between ocean diving and the specialized skills required for overhead environments. The attitude was straightforward. If you could handle the challenging waters off the Australian coast, you could handle anything underwater. This assumption would prove tragically wrong. On May 27, 1973, 9 divers made the journey to the Shaft, their vehicles loaded with gear and anticipation. Christine Millot, at 18, was the youngest of the group but had already established herself as a skilled diver with an infectious enthusiasm for exploration. Her brothers Stephen, 20, and Glenn, 22, shared her passion, and the 3 siblings had become well-known figures in the local diving scene. Stephen was methodical in his approach, often carrying a camera to document their discoveries, while Glenn was known for his steady nerves under pressure. Gordon Roberts, 25, brought a more scientific approach to diving, often studying maps and geological surveys before attempting new sites. His meticulous planning had earned him respect among his peers, and others often sought his advice on complex dives. John Bockerman, 31, was perhaps the most experienced of the group, having spent years exploring the treacherous waters along the southern coast, where strong currents and unpredictable weather tested even veteran divers. Peter Burr, 28, was known for his physical fitness and strong swimming ability, qualities that served him well in challenging conditions. Larry Reynolds, 24, had developed a reputation for remaining calm under pressure, a trait that made him a sought-after diving partner. Robert Smith, 26, possessed what many considered the most valuable quality in a diver: good judgment. He had a talent for reading conditions and making conservative decisions that kept him out of trouble. Joan Harper, 23, would serve as her surface support, a role that might seem passive but was actually crucial to the operation. Surface support maintains communication with the diving team, monitors weather conditions, coordinates emergency response if needed, and serves as the vital link between the underwater world and the surface. Joan took this responsibility seriously, understanding that the divers' lives might depend on her vigilance. They were good divers, the kind who understood the ocean's moods and respected its power. They knew how to read currents and tides, how to manage air consumption at depth, and how to handle the equipment failures and unexpected challenges that inevitably arise in underwater exploration. But there's a crucial difference between open water diving and cave diving that few appreciated in 1973. The ocean, for all its dangers, offers escape routes. A diver in trouble can always surface, always find a way up and out. Caves do not offer such mercy. Their first descent exceeded all expectations. The shot line guided them through the shaft's throat, past walls that seemed to pulse with ancient life as their lights played across limestone formations sculpted by eons of water flow. The rock told stories of deep time, fossilized marine creatures embedded in the walls, flowstone formations that had taken millennia to form, and passages that revealed the complex hydrology of the underground system. At 150 feet, they paused at the line's end, staring into the abyss below. The legendary rock pile beckoned from the darkness, a jumbled collection of limestone blocks that had fallen from the ceiling countless years ago. To the divers, it represented more than just a geological feature. It was a destination, a goal that would prove they had conquered the shaft's mysteries. They pushed deeper and made a discovery that would seal their fate the next day. They could do it. They had the skills, the air reserves, the nerve. The passages were navigable, the depths manageable, the rewards extraordinary. All 9 divers returned to the surface elated, talking over each other as they shared their experiences, already planning their return. The shaft had tested them and found them worthy. What they didn't fully understand was that caves are dynamic environments. Water levels fluctuate, sediment settles and redistributes, and conditions can change dramatically between visits. The clear water they had experienced on May 27th was not a guarantee of what they would find the next day. May 28th dawned with deceptive calm. The weather was perfect for diving, clear skies, minimal wind, and excellent visibility at the surface. At 1:30 p.m., 8 divers descended while Joan Harper maintained her surface watch, monitoring their dive times and planned return schedules. The familiar routine of gear checks, buddy assignments, and final preparations gave no hint of the tragedy that was about to unfold. May 28th dawned with Robert Smith, perhaps more cautious than the others, perhaps simply more experienced with the effects of depth, began feeling the telltale signs of nitrogen narcosis early in the dive. At depth, the increased partial pressure of nitrogen has an intoxicating effect on the human brain, creating symptoms similar to alcohol intoxication. The euphoria, the loosening of mental discipline, the impairment of judgment. He recognized these warning signs from previous deep dives and made the decision that would save his life. He began his ascent, leaving 7 others to continue into the depths. What happened next transformed a routine exploration into a nightmare. The water, crystal clear the day before, had become clouded with fine sediment. The exact cause remains unclear. It could have been groundwater fluctuations, disturbance from their previous day's activities, or simply the natural redistribution of particles in the cave system. Each movement, each kick of fins, each touch of the walls stirred up more particles until visibility dropped to virtually nothing. 7 experienced divers found themselves effectively blind, swimming through murky water where their powerful lights barely penetrated inches ahead. In open water, this would have been manageable, a slow, careful ascent to clearer water, using compass bearings and natural navigation to reach safety. In a cave system, it became a death trap. The remaining divers, already dealing with nitrogen narcosis at depth, began making the kinds of mistakes that kill cave divers. They lost formation, breaking the buddy system that might have saved them. They lost track of each other in the murky water, each swimmer becoming isolated in their own bubble of limited visibility. Most fatally, they lost track of their air consumption as stress and panic began to set in, causing them to breathe faster and deplete their gas supplies more rapidly. Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts found themselves swimming upward, following what they believed was the path to safety. Their lights cut through the murky water, revealing limestone walls that seemed to guide them toward the surface. The walls created a natural chimney effect, drawing the divers upward with the promise of escape. But the walls were lying. Instead of finding daylight, they discovered a dome-shaped chamber, a perfect geological trap where the ceiling curved seamlessly into the walls with no exit. The formation was beautiful in its deadly symmetry, a natural prison created by millions of years of water flow that had carved out this circular room and then sealed it off from the surface. The dome was large enough to give false hope, with air pockets at the top that might have provided temporary breathing space. But ultimately, it was a dead end. Other divers later reported seeing two frantic lights dancing against the dome's ceiling, the beams moving in increasingly desperate patterns as Christine and Gordon realized their predicament. The lights swept back and forth, searching for an opening that didn't exist, growing more erratic as their air supplies dwindled. In those final moments, witnesses said, the two seemed to draw close together, a gesture of human comfort facing the inevitable. Elsewhere in the cave system, Stephen Millott had reached the rock pile that had drawn them all to this place. His methodical nature had served him well in navigating the complex passages, and his camera was later found near the formation, suggesting he had achieved his goal of documenting this remote landmark. But achievement and survival proved to be different things entirely. Stephen's body was eventually recovered 50 feet under an overhang, possibly having been buoyant at the time of death, a reminder that even in death, the physics of diving continue to apply. John Bockerman faced perhaps the most tragic end. Other divers reported seeing him swimming purposefully deeper into the cave system, seemingly unaware of the danger around him. Nitrogen narcosis had so completely compromised his judgment that he appeared oblivious to his situation, swimming with determined strokes toward a destination that existed only in his intoxicated mind. The rapture of the deep had claimed him completely, turning his years of experience into a liability as he confidently navigated toward his own death. His body was found 20 feet beyond where he was last seen, deeper in the cave system than any human had previously ventured. Even in death, he had continued to explore, his lifeless form serving as a marker for the farthest point of human penetration into the shaft's mysteries. Peter Burr, Larry Reynolds, and Glenn Millott fought their own desperate battles in the silt-filled passages. Each struggled privately against panic, disorientation, and the steady depletion of their air supplies. The cave had become an alien environment where familiar skills no longer applied, where up and down lost meaning, and where every decision carried life or death consequences. Glenn Millott, the surviving brother, would later speak of the horror of losing his siblings in the dark water, of hearing their voices calling out in the murky chaos before being swallowed by silence. Peter Burr's physical fitness served him well as he fought to maintain his bearing and conserve his air. Larry Reynolds' reputation for staying calm under pressure was tested to its absolute limit as he navigated by feel through passages that had become completely unfamiliar. Through skill, luck, or sheer determination, these three managed to find their way back to the shot line and began the long ascent to the surface. The climb to safety required careful decompression stops to avoid the bends, but their air supplies were running critically low. Each breath became precious, each moment underwater a gamble with their lives. Peter Burr surfaced with his air gauge reading dangerously low, the needle hovering near empty. The others weren't far behind, their faces showing the shock and exhaustion of men who had stared death in the face and barely escaped. When Joan Harper saw only 4 divers break the surface instead of 8, she knew immediately that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Robert Smith, who had wisely aborted his dive early, delivered the grim news that everyone already understood. They wouldn't be searching for survivors. They would be searching for bodies. The South Australian Police Underwater Recovery Squad attempted retrieval operations on May 29th and 30th, but the shaft jealously guarded its victims. The same conditions that had claimed 4 lives, poor visibility, complex cave geometry, and extreme depth, made recovery nearly impossible without specialized cave diving expertise that simply didn't exist in the region at the time. The police divers, trained for open water recoveries, found themselves facing an environment that rendered their skills inadequate. For months, The bodies remained in the limestone depths, while experts debated how to safely retrieve them. The tragedy had highlighted a critical gap in Australian diving capabilities. There were no properly trained cave divers in the country who could safely navigate such complex recovery operations. It wasn't until January 1974 that properly trained cave divers with specialized equipment finally entered the system, imported from overseas where cave diving had developed into a more sophisticated discipline. Using multiple guideline systems, staged decompression strategies, and specialized breathing gas mixtures, they began the methodical process of mapping the cave and locating the victims. The recovery operation became a training ground for Australian cave diving, with techniques and equipment being developed specifically for the unique challenges of the shaft. Christine Millott and Gordon Roberts were found together between March 9th and 11th, 1974, at depths of 185 to 195 feet, positioned in the dome-shaped chamber where they had spent their final moments. John Bockerman's recovery required additional months of preparation, finally achieved on April 9th after an exhaustive operation that pushed the limits of 1970s cave diving technology. The autopsies confirmed what everyone already knew. All four had drowned from oxygen depletion, their air supplies exhausted in the dark passages. But Special Magistrate R.F. Stokes' coroner's report went beyond the immediate cause of death, examining the systemic failures that had made the tragedy inevitable. The divers' inexperience in cave environments, the absence of proper safety protocols, missing guidelines and backup systems, inadequate planning for the unique challenges of overhead environments. Each factor alone might have been manageable, but together they created a cascade of failures that turned adventure into catastrophe. The report's conclusion was devastating in its clarity. This didn't have to happen. With proper training, equipment, and procedures, skilled divers would have returned home to their families. The shaft tragedy sent shockwaves through Australia's diving community. Access to sinkholes was immediately restricted, and on July 11th, 1973, the Cave Divers Association of Australia was formed. The CDA implemented comprehensive training programs, site grading systems, and safety standards that transformed cave diving from a dangerous hobby into a regulated discipline. Every safety protocol that followed, every training requirement, every piece of specialized equipment carried an invisible inscription: never again. Today, the shaft still exists, still calls to those who would explore its depths. But the divers who answer that call now carry with them the accumulated wisdom born from tragedy. They use continuous guidelines and maintain buddy contact. They plan their gas consumption with military precision. They understand that the margin between adventure and catastrophe often comes down to preparation and humility. The limestone walls that witnessed the final moments of Christine Millott, Gordon Roberts, Stephen Millott, and John Bockerman remain unchanged, but the community that explores them has been forever transformed. Their deaths became the foundation for a safety culture that has protected countless lives in the decades since. The shaft claimed 4 lives on that May Day in 1973, but their loss ensured that future explorers would not face the same deadly ignorance. Perhaps that's the most fitting memorial. Not stone or bronze, but a living legacy written in the survival of every cave diver who follows proper protocols and returns home safely. The Earth eventually gave up its victims, but it kept their lesson forever.